The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when James Parker stepped onto the frost-covered gravel of County Road 16. His breath hung in clouds before him as he adjusted the worn straps of his backpack, the material frayed from years of the same motion. A car rushed past, spraying slush onto his military-issue boots that had seen both the deserts of Afghanistan and now the unforgiving winter of rural Minnesota. James didn't flinch. At 43, the former Marine had developed an almost supernatural tolerance for discomfort. 3 miles into his journey, the industrial silhouette of Grayson Manufacturing emerged against the brightening sky. The factories, smokestacks belched white plumes that merged with the low-hanging clouds, creating an almost ethereal canopy above the otherwise unremarkable building. The distant sound of machinery hummed like a mechanical heartbeat, growing louder with each step James took toward his destination. James was lean but powerful, his frame hardened not by a gym routine but by necessity. His face, weathered beyond his years, rarely betrayed emotion, though kindness lurked in the crow's feet around his eyes. His dark hair, still cut high and tight as it had been during his 12 years of service, was now peppered with grey at the temples. He walked with purpose, each stride economical and deliberate, as if perpetually conserving energy for the next inevitable challenge. Across town, Eleanor Grayson tapped her manicured fingernails against her mahogany desk, scanning the quarterly reports with growing concern. At 38, she had inherited Grayson Manufacturing from her father just 18 months ago, and the pressure to maintain its success weighed on her constantly. Her sleek office overlooked the factory floor, a literal glass ceiling separating her from the workers below. Unlike James, Eleanor's appearance was meticulously crafted. Her tailored suit, her precisely styled blonde hair, her carefully applied makeup, armor of a different kind. "Miss Grayson, your 9 o'clock is here," her assistant announced through the intercom. Eleanor straightened, composing her features into what her father had always called her business face. She recognized the name on her calendar. James Parker. Shift supervisor, former military, consistently early, never missed a day. The model employee, according to his file, despite his unusual commute that had become something of a legend among the workers. James entered her office with the same quiet efficiency with which he did everything. "You wanted to see me, Miss Grayson?" "Yes, James. Please sit." Eleanor gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "I'll get right to the point. The quarterly numbers are concerning. We're facing some difficult decisions." "I understand, ma'am. How can I help?" Eleanor's expression softened momentarily. This was the most difficult part of her job. "It's not about help, James. It's about restructuring. We're eliminating your position." The silence that followed felt physical, a sudden pressure in the room. James sat perfectly still, his posture unchanged, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I see," he said finally, his voice betraying nothing. "May I ask why my position specifically?" "Your department is operating at a loss. We need to consolidate supervisory roles." Eleanor slid a folder across the desk. "There's a severance package, 2 months' salary, and of course, a recommendation letter." James didn't reach for the folder. "Ms. Grayson, I've increased production efficiency by 22% since taking over. My team has the lowest defect rate in the plant. The numbers don't support keeping your position, James. I'm sorry." "With respect, I believe they do." For the first time, a hint of emotion crept into his voice. "I can show you exactly where we've cut costs without sacrificing quality." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She hadn't expected pushback, especially not from someone with his military background. "The decision is final. I've reviewed everything thoroughly." James finally reached for the folder, his movements measured. "Have you been down to the floor recently, Miss Grayson? Seen what we've implemented?" "I don't micromanage my supervisors, Mr. Parker. That's not what I asked." The words hung between them, a challenge that surprised them both. Eleanor's gaze cooled. "This isn't a negotiation. Security will escort you to collect your things. As if on cue, the door opened and a security guard appeared. James stood, the folder held loosely at his side. For a moment, Eleanor thought she saw something dangerous flash across his face, but then it was gone, replaced by that unreadable mask. 10 years with this company, he said quietly. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. Again, I'm sorry it's come to this. Eleanor was already reaching for her phone, the conversation clearly over in her mind. James nodded once, a gesture that might have been military acknowledgement or simply resignation. He turned to leave, his back straight, shoulders set. "James," Eleanor called, a sudden impulse she couldn't quite explain. "How will you get home today?" He paused at the threshold, not turning back. "The same way I came, Ms. Grayson. One step at a time." As the door closed behind him, Eleanor felt an unexpected weight settle in her chest. Through the glass wall of her office, she watched as James descended to the factory floor, where his team waited, unaware that their lives were about to change. Something about his dignity in the face of rejection lingered with her, a splinter in her thoughts that refused to be dismissed. The walk home felt longer than the 10 miles it actually covered. James moved mechanically, one foot in front of the other, his mind replaying the meeting with Eleanor Grayson on an endless loop. 10 years, a decade of pre-dawn starts and late-night finishes, of walking through blizzards and summer thunderstorms, of never once calling in sick, even the day after he'd received news about Rodriguez, the last of his unit to pass. Liver failure, the doctors had said, though James knew better. The bottle had claimed more of his brothers than the war ever did. What stung most wasn't the termination itself. James had survived enough to know that jobs came and went. It was the dismissal of his work, the casual way Eleanor Grayson had denied the improvements he'd implemented. 22% efficiency increase. Numbers didn't lie, even if people did. I should be angry, James thought, surprising himself with the realization that he wasn't. Not exactly. What he felt was something closer to disappointment, not just in losing his job, but in Eleanor Grayson herself. She'd inherited the company 18 months ago, and in that time he'd seen her exactly 3 times on the factory floor. Her father, Oldman Grayson, had known every worker by name. A passing truck slowed beside him, the window rolling down to reveal Mike Dennison, one of the machinists from second shift. "Hey, Sarge, heard what happened? That's some bullshit. Need a ride?" James shook his head. "Thanks, Mike, I'm good." "You sure? It's starting to look like rain." "Walking clears my head." Mike hesitated, then nodded in understanding. "Call if you change your mind. And hey, we're meeting at O'Malley's tonight. First round's on me." As the truck pulled away, James felt an unexpected warmth cut through his numbness. A small kindness, but it mattered. He thought of his team, how they'd react to the news. Davis with her 3 kids, Ortiz saving for college, young Webb who reminded him so much of the new recruits, eager to prove himself. By the time James reached the modest ranch house he called home, a decision had crystallized in his mind. One that surprised him as much as it would surprise anyone who knew him. Shrugging off his backpack, he headed straight for his home office, a spare bedroom converted into a meticulously organized space, dominated by a desk he'd built himself from reclaimed. Opening his laptop, James began to type. Not a complaint, not an angry screed. Instead, he crafted a detailed analysis of his department's performance, complete with charts showing the efficiency improvements, cost savings, and quality metrics. He included specific innovations his team had implemented, from the reorganized workflow that reduced walking distance by 40% to the preventative maintenance schedule that had virtually eliminated emergency shutdowns. At the end, he wrote simply, "I respectfully request that you reconsider not just my position, but the impact these changes will have on the team that implemented them. They deserve better. So does Grayson Manufacturing." James reread it twice, making small adjustments before sending it to Eleanor Grayson's email. He expected nothing to come of it, but taking the high road felt right, a decision the man he aspired to be would make. Across town, in her glass-walled corner office, Eleanor Grayson massaged her temples as she reviewed the afternoon's termination. Schedule: 5 more supervisors, 15 floor workers, all necessary cuts according to the efficiency consultants she'd hired to help steady the company's faltering finances. "Ms. Grayson," her assistant's voice interrupted her thoughts. "There's someone here to see you." "He doesn't have an appointment," Eleanor sighed. "Who is it, Diane?" "Marcus Webb from production. He's quite insistent." Eleanor briefly considered, refusing, then relented. "Send him in." Marcus Webb was barely 25, with an earnestness that made him seem even younger. He stood awkwardly before her desk, hat literally in hand. "Mr. Webb, what can I do for you?" "It's about Sergeant Parker, ma'am." Eleanor stiffened. "That matter is closed." "With all due respect, Miss Grayson, you've made a mistake." Webb's voice shook slightly, but he pressed on. "Sarge, Mr. Parker, he's the reason we're still operational. When the main assembly line broke down last month, he worked 36 hours straight to fix it instead of waiting for the service rep. Saved the company thousands. Mr. Webb, and the reorganization he implemented cut our materials waste by nearly a third. He didn't even put that in the official reports, because he said results speak louder than promises." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "What do you mean he didn't put it in the reports?" Before Webb could answer, Eleanor's computer chimed with a new email notification. "James Parker's name caught her eye. That's all, Mr. Webb. I'll take your concerns under advisement." After the young man left, Eleanor opened James's email. As she read through his detailed analysis, comparing it with the report's her efficiency, consultants had provided, a cold feeling settled in her stomach. The discrepancies were glaring. Where the consultants had identified James's department as underperforming, his own data, backed by production records she could easily verify, told a completely different story. Maria Vasquez, James's neighbor for the past 7 years, was tending to her front garden when she spotted him sitting on his porch, nursing a beer as the afternoon faded toward evening. "Early day, James," she called, knowing full well his shift normally ended. "Hours later." "You could say that," he replied with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maria had known James long enough to recognize when something was wrong. The single mother of 2 teenagers, she had come to rely on James as the one stable presence in the neighborhood, always there to help with heavy lifting, to jump a dead car battery, to quietly shovel her driveway after heavy snowfalls before. She even woke up. "Come eat with us tonight," she said, not making it a question. "I made too much puzzle anyway." Before James could decline, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Parker," he answered. Military brief. "Mr. Parker, this is Eleanor Grayson." James straightened, catching Maria's curious glance. "Yes, ma'am. I've reviewed your email." A pause. "And I've had a rather illuminating conversation with one of your team members. Ms. Grayson, I'd like to continue this discussion in person. Are you available tomorrow morning?" James hesitated only briefly. "Yes, ma'am. What time?" 8 o'clock. "My office." Another pause. "And Mr. Parker, thank you for your professionalism today. It's given Mesomethy to consider." The call ended, leaving James staring at his phone in confusion. Maria approached, curiosity evident on her face. "Good news?" she asked. "I'm not sure," James admitted. "But I think, maybe." That night, as Eleanor Grayson sat in her father's old reading chair in the home she'd grown up in, she flipped through personnel files with growing unease. The efficiency consultants she'd hired, at considerable expense, had provided recommendations that, in light of James Parker's data, now seemed not just flawed, but deliberately misleading. The question was why, and more importantly, what she was going to do about it now that termination notices had already gone out. Her gaze fell on a framed photo of her father standing among his workers, arms around their shoulders, everyone smiling. When had she last seen that kind of camaraderie? On the factory floor? Eleanor closed the file containing James Parker's immaculate service record and made a decision that would set in motion changes neither of them could possibly anticipate. Changes that would ripple far beyond Grayson Manufacturing, beyond their small town, and eventually catch the attention of one of the world's most unpredictable billionaires. Word spread through Grayson Manufacturing like wildfire. By mid-morning, everyone from the janitors to the executive assistants had heard some version of the story. James Parker, the veteran who walked 20 miles round-trip every day, had somehow reversed his termination. More than that, rumor had it he'd been called to a private meeting with Eleanor Grayson herself. "I heard he threatened to sue," whispered Doreen from accounting as she refilled her coffee mug. "No way," countered Jeff from IT. "Parker's not the type. My buddy in production says he sent her some kind of report that exposed those efficiency consultants as frauds." Outside Eleanor's office, James sat with perfect posture, the habits of military bearing never quite leaving him. He'd arrived 15 minutes early, despite having to start his walk before sunrise. The only sign of his 10-mile journey was a light sheen of perspiration at his temples, which he discreetly wiped away in the men's room before reporting to Eleanor's assistant. Inside, Eleanor paced behind her desk, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I understand the contract terms, Mr. Hoffman, but the fact remains that your consultant's recommendations were not just inaccurate, but demonstrably harmful to operations." She paused, listening. "No, I don't think a revised report will be necessary. Consider our engagement terminated. You'll receive the final payment for services rendered, nothing more." She ended the call with more force than necessary, then took a deep breath before calling out, "Send him in, please." James entered to find Eleanor looking more human than he'd ever seen her, slightly disheveled, a coffee stain on her otherwise immaculate blouse, dark circles suggesting a night of minimal sleep. "Mr. Parker, thank you for coming." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I've spent the night reviewing your data against the consultant's recommendations." "And?" James kept his expression neutral, though a flicker of hope had ignited. "And I owe you an apology." The words clearly didn't come easily to her. "You were right. Your department's performance has been exceptional, not substandard. What about the other supervisors? The floor workers?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing him. Most people in his position would be focused solely on their own situation. "I've halted all terminations pending review. I've also terminated our contract with the consulting firm." James nodded, satisfied. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm reinstating you, but I need more from you than just resuming your previous duties." Eleanor leaned forward. "I need you to help me understand what's really happening on that factory floor." 15 miles away, in the neighboring town of Preston Falls, Calvin Wilson adjusted his bow tie in the mirror of his small-town newspaper office. At 62, he'd been editor of the Preston Falls Gazette for nearly 3 decades, watching as the internet slowly strangled local journalism. His staff had dwindled from 12 to 3. Circulation had dropped by 70%, and he'd taken a second job bartending weekends at O'Malley's just to keep the presses running. His cell phone buzzed with a text from his daughter, Amelia, who worked in Grayson Manufacturing's HR department. "Dad, you might want to look into what's happening here. Efficiency consultants busted, mass layoffs reversed, and the boss lady is actually walking the factory floor with James Parker, the walking veteran. Something's up." Calvin's journalistic instincts, dulled but not dead, tingled with interest. The Grayson family had been industrial royalty in these parts for generations. Any hint of trouble at the manufacturing plant affected the entire region's economy. "Lisa," he called to his remaining reporter, a former high school English teacher with a knack for storytelling. How do you feel about digging into Grayson Manufacturing today? Back at the plant, Eleanor struggled to keep up with James's long strides. As he led her through areas of the factory she hadn't visited in months, workers straightened as they passed, surprise evident on their faces at seeing the boss in their domain. "This is where we implemented the new inventory management system," James explained, pointing to a reorganized materials section. "We color-coded by priority and frequency of use, reduced search time by 64%. Eleanor frowned. "That's not in any of the official reports. We didn't have official approval to change the system. The previous manager denied our request 3 times due to procedural concerns." James's tone remained respectful, but his implication was clear. "So, you did it anyway?" "We did it on our own time over a weekend. When productivity improved, nobody asked questions." As they continued the tour, Eleanor was struck by how differently the workers responded to James compared to her. With him, there were easy smiles, inside jokes, a natural camaraderie. With her, stiff nods and guarded expressions. "Mr. Parker," she said quietly as they approached the break room, "how many of these improvements were made without official approval?" "Most of them," he admitted. "The approval process takes months. Sometimes problems need immediate solutions, and you implemented these solutions on your own initiative." "With my team," he corrected. "Every person on that floor has valuable insights. My job is to listen and facilitate." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. While she'd been relying on consultants and reports, the actual solutions to the company's efficiency problems had been happening under her nose, implemented by the very people she'd been planning to let go. That evening, at O'Malley's Bar and Grill, Calvin Wilson listened intently as James recounted the day's events, his reporter's notebook open beside his bartending supplies. "So she really had no idea about any of the improvements you'd made?" Calvin asked, sliding a fresh beer toward James. "None. Everything got filtered through middle management and those consultants." James took a sip, then added, "Not entirely her fault. It's a big operation, and she inherited a mess when her father died." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "Mighty generous. Perspective from a man who nearly lost his job yesterday." James shrugged. "I've seen good officers make bad calls with faulty intelligence." The door to O'Malley's swung open, and a collective hush fell over the room. Eleanor Grayson stood in the entrance, looking decidedly out of place in her business attire amid the casual Friday crowd. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered Calvin, already, sensing a bigger story developing. Eleanor spotted James and made her way over, ignoring the stares and whispers. "Mr. Parker, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Miss Grayson. Can I buy you a drink?" The offer clearly surprised her. Yes. Thank you." She settled onto the adjacent bar stool. "Scotch, neat, please." Calvin introduced himself as he poured her drink, deliberately omitting his connection to the newspaper. "First time in O'Malley's, Miss Grayson." "First time in any bar in this town," she admitted, "but it's been a revelatory couple of days." The next morning, the Preston Falls Gazette ran a front-page story. "Grayson Manufacturing reverses layoffs. CEO admits misguided strategy." Calvin's piece detailed the near miss with the efficiency consultants and hinted at a new direction for the company, featuring quotes from both James and Eleanor. By noon, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By evening, it had caught the attention of several business publications, which framed it as either a heartwarming tale of corporate redemption or a textbook case of management failure, depending on their editorial slant. And in a sprawling office in Austin, Texas, a certain billionaire known for his unpredictable interests and impulsive decisions scrolled through his newsfeed, pausing on a headline about a veteran who walked 10 miles to work, a CEO who admitted her mistakes, and a small-town manufacturing plant that might just have something to teach the tech world about authentic innovation. With a few taps on his phone, Elon Musk set in motion inquiries that would soon connect this obscure local story to his vast network of influence, his restless mind already spinning with possibilities that neither James nor Eleanor could possibly anticipate. Meanwhile, in his small home, James received an unexpected call from Maria Vasquez, who had just finished her shift at the town's medical center. "James, have you seen the news? You're becoming famous." Her voice bubbled with excitement. "It's just a local story, Maria," he replied, uncomfortable with the attention. "Not anymore. My sister in Chicago just texted me a link. You're trending." She paused, then added more seriously, "You deserve this, James. After everything you've been through, maybe it's finally your time for something good." James didn't know how to respond to that. After losing his wife to cancer 5 years ago, after struggling with his own demons from the war, after walking those endless miles in all weather, because he couldn't afford to replace his broken-down truck. The idea that good things might be on the horizon felt dangerously like hope, and hope, in his experience, was a luxury he couldn't often afford. Still, as he prepared for bed that night, setting his alarm for 4:30 a.m. to begin tomorrow's walk to work, James couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had shifted, not just at Grayson Manufacturing, but in the delicate balance of his carefully contained life. 3 days after the newspaper story broke, James's phone pinged with a text message as he prepared for his pre-dawn walk to work. The number wasn't in his contacts. "This is Eleanor Grayson. Would you be willing to meet before your shift to discuss a proposal? I can pick you up at 5:30. Save you the morning walk." James stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. In the 12 years he'd worked at Grayson Manufacturing, no manager, let alone the CEO, had ever offered him a ride. Especially not at 5:30 in the morning. That would be fine. "Thank you," he sent the reply before he could overthink it, then glanced around his modest kitchen. The routine of his mornings had been unvarying for years. Coffee brewed strong enough to stand a spoon in, plain oatmeal with a spoonful of honey, thermos filled for the long walk. The prospect of breaking this ritual left him feeling strangely unmoored. At precisely 5:30 a.m., a sleek Audi pulled into his driveway, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. James locked his front door and approached the vehicle, noting with mild surprise that Eleanor was driving herself rather than utilizing a company car and driver, which he knew she was entitled to. "Good morning, Mr. Parker," she greeted as he slid into the passenger seat. The car smelled of new leather and faint traces of an expensive perfume he couldn't name. "Morning, Miss Grayson." James set his backpack between his boots, hyper-aware of the contrast between his worn work clothes and her tailored business attire. "I thought we might stop for breakfast if that's acceptable," she said, already pulling back onto the empty street. "There's a diner about halfway between here and the plant." James nodded, unsure of the proper protocol for pre-dawn breakfast with the woman who'd fired and rehired him in the span of 48 hours. "Lou's place. Good choice. Best pancakes in 3 counties. A ghost of a smile flickered across Eleanor's face. "I wouldn't know. I've never been to Lou's." The words escaped before James could filter them. "But it's an institution around here." "I don't actually live around here," she admitted, eyes fixed on the road. "I commute from River Heights." James processed this information silently. River Heights was an exclusive suburb nearly an hour away, known for its gated communities and private security. The distance explained why Eleanor remained disconnected from the daily realities of her employees' lives, but it raised new questions about why she'd chosen to make this drive so early just to speak with him. At Lou's diner, the bell above the door jangled as they entered. The handful of patrons, mostly truckers and early shift workers, glanced up briefly, then did visible double-takes at the unexpected pairing. "Well, I'll be," Lou himself called from behind the counter. "James Parker with a lady friend, and before sunrise, no less." James felt heat rise in his neck. Morning, Lou. This is Miss Grayson, your boss I know. Lou interrupted with a wink. Saw your pictures in the Gazette. The whole town's talking. Eleanor handled the moment with unexpected grace, extending her hand across the counter. Pleasure to meet you, Lou. James tells me you make the best pancakes around. That I do, Mom. Special recipe my grandmother brought from Greece. Lou gestured toward an empty booth. You two sit. Coffee's coming right up. As they settled into the booth, James noticed Eleanor subtly surveying the diner. The worn vinyl seats, the slightly sticky laminated menus, the local sports memorabilia decorating the walls. Not with disdain, he realized, but with genuine curiosity, as if she were visiting a foreign country. I appreciate you agreeing to meet like this, Eleanor began, folding her hands on the table. What I want to discuss is somewhat delicate. Before she could continue, Lou appeared with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Ready to order, or need a minute? I'll have the usual, James said. Short stack, 2 eggs over easy, side of bacon. Lou recited with practiced ease, then turned expectantly to Eleanor. She hesitated only briefly. I'll have the same. When Lou retreated, Eleanor leaned forward, voice lowered. The story in the Gazette has generated attention, more than I anticipated. I noticed. James had been fielding curious looks and questions for days, an uncomfortable experience for someone who preferred to remain in the background. We've received inquiries from several news outlets seeking interviews, and more surprisingly, she paused, seeming to weigh her words. We've been contacted by representatives from Tesla. Apparently, Elon Musk read the article. James nearly choked on his coffee. Elon Musk? Why would he care about a small-town manufacturing plant? That's what I intend to find out. They've requested a tour and meeting next week. Eleanor's fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on her mug. I'd like you to be present. The request hung between them, its implications expanding to fill the space. This wasn't just about a meeting. It was an acknowledgement that James understood aspects of the business that Eleanor did not. Of course, he said finally. Whatever you need, there's more. Eleanor took a deep breath. The regional news is planning a feature. They want to interview both of us about the changes we're implementing. James frowned. What changes? That's why I wanted to speak with you privately. Eleanor lowered her voice further. After seeing what your team accomplished with unofficial improvements, I'm considering a company-wide initiative, something that would empower workers at all levels to identify and implement efficiency measures, with proper oversight, of course, like a suggestion box. James couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Like a revolution, Eleanor countered, surprising him. Complete restructuring of how ideas flow through the organization. But for it to work, I need someone who understands both the factory floor and management perspectives, someone the workers trust. Lou arrived with their food, momentarily halting the conversation. James used the interruption to process what Eleanor was suggesting. She wasn't just offering him his job back, she was proposing a new role entirely. Why me? He asked finally, cutting into his eggs. You barely know me. Eleanor considered the question as she methodically spread butter on her pancakes. Because you could have used that newspaper article to humiliate me, to point out how disconnected management has become. Instead, you defended my decision-making even after I nearly fired you. She met his gaze directly. That shows character, Mr. Parker. Something my father valued highly. The mention of her father shifted something in the air between them. James had worked for Henry Grayson for years before his sudden heart attack brought Eleanor into the picture. The older man had been tough, but fair, known for unexpected acts of generosity toward his employees. Your father once paid to have my transmission replaced, James said quietly. Never made a big deal of it, just handed me the keys and said he needed me at work on time. Surprise flickered across Eleanor's face. I didn't know that. There's a lot about how your father ran things that isn't in the company records. James, took a sip of coffee. Understood that taking care of people wasn't charity, it was good business. Eleanor absorbed this, something vulnerable briefly visible in her expression. I have a lot to learn, it seems. We all do. James surprised himself with his candor. I'm still figuring out how to navigate civilian life, even after all these years. The confession created an unexpected bridge between them. Two people carrying different but equally weighty responsibilities, both unsure of their footing. Across town, in his small newspaper office, Calvin Wilson listened to the voicemail Eleanor Grayson had left the previous evening. Mr. Wilson, I'd like to offer you an exclusive on our next steps at Grayson Manufacturing. The story's gotten bigger than expected, and I'd prefer someone with local understanding to tell it properly. A brief hesitation. Also, my father always spoke highly of your integrity as a journalist. Calvin smiled to himself. Henry Grayson and he had been unlikely fishing buddies, though neither had ever publicly acknowledged their friendship. It seemed the daughter had inherited more of her father's instincts than perhaps she realized. He dialed the callback number, already mentally composing the opening paragraph of what might be the most significant story the Preston Falls Gazette had run in years. As James and Eleanor finished their breakfast, an unexpected awkwardness settled between them. The formal barriers of their professional relationship had begun to erode, but neither was quite sure what might replace them. I should get you to work, Eleanor said, checking her watch. Your shift starts soon. Actually, James replied, if you have time, there's something I'd like to show you first. Something that might help with these new ideas you're considering. Curiosity won out over her schedule. Lead the way, Mr. Parker. James, he corrected, mildly. If we're going to be working together on this revolution of yours, Mr. Parker feels unnecessary. A small smile softened Eleanor's features. James, then, and I'm Eleanor, not Miss Grayson, at least when we're not in official meetings. The concession felt significant, a tiny but meaningful step toward the partnership they would need to navigate. The changes coming to Grayson Manufacturing, changes that neither of them could fully anticipate, as Eleanor's Audi pulled away from Lou's diner and headed not toward the factory, but to a destination only James knew. The morning sun broke fully over the horizon, painting the small town in soft golden light as they drove toward an uncertain future that would soon intersect with one of the most powerful and unpredictable forces in modern business, the attention of Elon Musk. James directed Eleanor to a nondescript, steel building on the outskirts of town. The faded sign reading Veterans Workshop hung slightly askew above the entrance. For a moment, Eleanor hesitated in her Audi, studying the worn exterior with uncertainty. "This is what you wanted to show me?" she asked, unable to mask her skepticism. "Trust me," James replied, a hint of amusement in his usually stoic expression. "Some things can't be explained, only experienced." The interior smelled of metal shavings, wood dust, and fresh coffee. The space was divided into workstations where a handful of men and women of varying ages worked intently on projects ranging from intricate wooden furniture to what appeared to be modified engine parts. None looked up immediately. They were too absorbed in their tasks. "Welcome to where innovation actually happens in this town," James said quietly. "No consultants, no quarterly reports, just problems and solutions." Eleanor felt immediately out of place in her tailored suit and heels, yet undeniably curious. "What is this place exactly?" "Officially, it's a rehabilitation program for veterans transitioning to civilian work," James explained, nodding to a grey-haired man who had finally noticed their entrance. "Unofficially, it's where half your factory's efficiency improvements originated." Before Eleanor could respond, the older man approached, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Parker, didn't expect you until Saturday." His eyes narrowed as he recognized Eleanor. "And you've brought company. Interesting choice." "Colonel Harris, this is Eleanor Grayson." James made the introduction with formal precision. Eleanor, Colonel Robert Harris, retired. He runs this place. Ms. Grayson. The colonel nodded curtly, making no move to offer his hand. Your factory employs 7 of my people, good workers, all of them. I'm sure they are, Eleanor responded, feeling strangely like she was being evaluated. James wanted me to see this place, though I'm not entirely sure why yet. The colonel exchanged a look with James that spoke of years of shared understanding. Show her the back room. That should clear things up. He turned to Eleanor with an appraising gaze. Your father visited us once a month, brought donuts and problems for us to solve. We've missed those visits. The revelation that her father had frequented this place caught Eleanor off guard. Why had he never mentioned it? What other connections had he maintained that she knew nothing about? James led her through the workshop to a door in the rear. As they passed, Eleanor noticed how the veterans acknowledged James, not with obvious greetings, but with subtle nods and brief eye contact, the quiet recognition among people who understood each other without words. The back room resembled a hybrid of engineering lab and junkyard. Whiteboards covered in diagrams and equations lined the walls. Tables overflowed with dismantled machinery, prototype parts, and specialized tools. But what immediately captured Eleanor's attention was a detailed scale model of Grayson Manufacturing's main production floor, accurate down to the smallest details, but reconfigured in ways that differed from the current layout. This is... Eleanor moved closer to the model, stunned by its precision. Where we experiment with improvements before, implementing them at the factory, James finished for her. The colonel was a logistics specialist. He can look at a workflow and spot inefficiencies most engineers miss. When I encountered problems at work that seemed unsolvable through official channels, I brought them here. Eleanor circled the model. Slowly, professional interest overtaking her initial discomfort. This layout, it's completely different from our current floor plan. It reduces walking distance by 40%, improves material flow by 35%, and creates dedicated spaces for quality checks that would cut defect rates in half, James explained. We've been refining it for months. Why wasn't this submitted through proper channels? Eleanor asked, already guessing the answer. It was 3 times. Each time it died in middle management because the disruption to implement it would temporarily impact production targets. Quarterly bonuses were at stake. James kept his tone matter-of-fact, without accusation. Eleanor felt a familiar pang of frustration, the same short-term thinking that had led her to trust the efficiency consultants had prevented this obviously superior design from reaching her desk. The veterans here understand systems thinking, James continued. In combat, inefficiency isn't just costly, it's deadly. That perspective translates surprisingly well to manufacturing. Eleanor ran her finger along the miniature assembly line, noticing the careful attention to ergonomics and flow. This is remarkable work. It's what we do, came a new voice. They turned to see a woman in her 30s leaning on a cane. We solve problems. It's practically our love language. Eleanor, this is Maya Reyes, James introduced them. Former Army engineer, current genius in residence. Maya approached with a slight limp, but a confident stride. The production floor model was my baby. I spent 16 months at Grayson in quality control before my department was downsized. Still had some ideas about how to improve things. The casual mention of the downsizing, a decision Eleanor had signed off on 18 months prior, created momentary tension. Rather than avoid it, Eleanor addressed it directly. That was my first major cost-cutting measure after taking over, she acknowledged. Looking at this model, I'm beginning to think it was short-sighted. Maya's eyebrows rose slightly at the admission. Didn't expect that. I'm finding myself saying that a lot lately, Eleanor replied with unexpected candor, learning that what looks good on paper doesn't always translate to reality. That's the difference between management and leadership, Colonel Harris said, having quietly entered the room. Management deals with the world as it exists on spreadsheets. Leadership deals with the world as it actually is, messy, human, and full of untapped potential. The Colonel's words struck Eleanor with uncomfortable precision. She'd been managing Grayson Manufacturing, yes, but had she ever truly led it? Your father understood that distinction, the Colonel continued. He respected data but trusted people. Eleanor felt a sudden, sharp longing for her father's guidance. I wish he'd had time to teach me more, she admitted quietly. Perhaps he still can, James suggested, through the people and systems he valued. The moment held a surprising intimacy, vulnerability from a woman who had built her professional identity on projecting strength and certainty. Eleanor cleared her throat, regaining her composure. This layout, she gestured to the model. Could I have a detailed proposal on my desk by Monday, with implementation timelines and cost projections? Maya and James exchanged surprised glances. You're serious? Maya asked. Completely. I want to show this to the Tesla representatives when they visit. Show them what real innovation looks like. It would disrupt production for at least 2 weeks, James cautioned. The quarterly numbers would take a hit. Some things are worth short-term costs, Eleanor replied with newfound conviction. Isn't that what leadership is about? Seeing beyond the immediate balance sheet? James studied her face, searching for signs of insincerity or calculation. Finding none, he nodded. We can have it ready. As they prepared to leave, Colonel Harris pulled James aside briefly, while Eleanor examined other projects around the room. You are sure about this, Parker? The Colonel asked quietly. Corporate types get excited about innovation until it impacts their bottom line. She's different, James found himself saying, surprising himself with his certainty. Or at least she's trying to be. The Colonel considered this. Her father was a good man. Took me 6 months to admit it, stubborn as I was. Give her a chance, but keep your guard up. When they returned to Eleanor's car, a new energy hummed between them. The tentative beginnings of mutual respect, perhaps even the seeds of trust. Thank you for showing me that, Eleanor said as she started the engine. I understand now why my father kept his connection to the workshop quiet. It gave him unfiltered access to ideas that might have been squashed in the official channels. Called it his secret weapon, James revealed. The place where real problems got real solutions, without politics getting in the way. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, processing this new insight into the father she thought she'd known completely. Wash different there than he was at the factory, I mean. James considered the question carefully. More relaxed, more curious. He asked questions instead of giving orders. Listened more than he spoke. He paused. He talked about you often. Eleanor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did he say? That you were brilliant, but needed to learn that business isn't just about numbers. That he hoped you'd discover that before you had to learn it the hard way. James hesitated, then added gently, Seems like that time has come. Instead of the defensive response he half expected, Eleanor simply nodded. Better late than never, I suppose. As they approached the factory, the morning shift workers were arriving in the parking lot. Many did double takes at the sight of the CEO's Audi pulling in alongside their modest vehicles. Even more surprising was the sight of James Parker emerging from the passenger seat, exchanging what appeared to be a friendly word with Eleanor before they walked toward the building together. Did you see that? Davis whispered to Ortiz as they clocked in. Parker rode in with the boss. Times are changing around here, Ortiz replied with a knowing smile. And about damn time. Inside, as they reached the point where their paths would diverge, Eleanor to her executive office, James to the production floor, an unexpected awkwardness descended. So, Eleanor began, this Tesla visit, it's scheduled for Wednesday at 10 a.m. We should probably meet beforehand to coordinate our approach. Agreed. Tuesday afternoon. Perfect. She hesitated, then extended her hand. Thank you, James, for showing me what I've been missing. He accepted the handshake, noting the strength in her grip, despite her slender fingers. "Thank you for being willing to see it." As Eleanor walked away, her heels clicking authoritatively on the polished floor of the executive corridor, James felt something shifting in his perception of her. No longer just the disconnected CEO who'd nearly fired him, but a complex woman, struggling to fill the enormous shoes left by her father, carrying burdens he was only beginning to understand. He turned toward the factory floor, his domain of metal and machinery, and the people who made it all work. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten, the energizing spark of possibility, of systems on the verge of meaningful change. And unknown to both James and Eleanor, a jet was at that moment being prepared in Austin, Texas, that would bring a wild card into their carefully developing plans. A billionaire known for upending expectations and transforming industries with a single spontaneous decision. The news traveled through Grayson Manufacturing with impossible speed. Elon Musk had changed his schedule. Instead of sending representatives on Wednesday, he was arriving personally, tomorrow. Eleanor stood in her office, phone pressed to her ear as she absorbed this information, her carefully organized week collapsing into chaos. "Yes, I understand it's an honor. We'll certainly accommodate Mr. Musk's revised timeline." She ended the call and immediately pressed the intercom. "Diane, get James Parker up here, now." Within minutes, James appeared in her doorway, still wearing his work gloves. "You heard? Just now. We have 24 hours to prepare for Elon Musk." Eleanor ran a hand through her usually immaculate hair. "The implementation plans for the new floor layout aren't ready, the quarterly reports aren't finalized, and half the executive team is at a conference in Chicago." James took in her rare display of anxiety with calm assessment. "What exactly does Musk want to see?" "That's just it, they won't say." His assistant mentioned authentic innovation and ground-level problem-solving, whatever caught his attention in that newspaper article. Eleanor sank into her chair. This could be an incredible opportunity or a complete disaster. Then let's make sure it's the former. James's quiet confidence steadied her. Show him the truth, both the problems and the solutions. No corporate showcase, no rehearsed presentations. "Show him the veterans workshop," Eleanor suggested suddenly, "the model of the floor redesign." James shook his head. The colonel would never agree to that. Those veterans value their privacy and independence too much. Eleanor considered this, then nodded. "You're right. We need to respect their boundaries." She thought for a moment. "What about your walk?" "My walk? The 10 miles to work. It's what initially caught attention in the article. What if we start there, show Musk the real story, beginning with why a valuable employee has been walking 20 miles round trip every day for years?" James stiffened slightly. "That's personal." "Exactly." Eleanor leaned forward. "This isn't just about manufacturing processes, James. It's about people. Your story matters. It highlights both what's broken and what's possible." Before James could respond, Eleanor's assistant appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic. "Miss Grayson, there's a call you need to take. It's about your father's estate." James moved to leave, but Eleanor gestured for him to stay. "Take a message, Diane. I'm in the middle of something important." "It's the estate lawyer, Miss Grayson. He says it's urgent, something about previously undisclosed assets." A flicker of confusion crossed Eleanor's face. "My father's estate was settled over a year ago. He's quite insistent." Eleanor sighed. "Fine, I'll take it." She glanced at James. "We'll continue this discussion afterward." James nodded and turned to leave, but Eleanor called after him. "Think about it, James. Your story could be the key to everything." Alone in her office, Eleanor picked up the phone. "This is Eleanor Grayson." "Ms. Grayson, this is Martin Whitfield from Benson Whitfield and Associates. Thank you for taking my call." The lawyer's voice was crisp and formal. "I'm handling some matters related to your father's estate that have recently come to light. Don't understand. The estate was settled 18 months ago. Yes, the primary estate. However, we've discovered what appears to be a separate trust your father established 5 years ago. It contains specific instructions regarding Grayson Manufacturing and certain beneficiaries. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of instructions? I'd prefer to discuss this in person, given the sensitive nature. But I can tell you that the trust includes provisions for a significant investment in what he termed the Veterans Initiative. There are also personal letters addressed to several individuals, including one, James Parker. Eleanor nearly dropped the phone. James Parker, my shift supervisor. I can't speak to his position at your company, but yes, that's one of the names. Your father left explicit instructions that these materials were to be revealed only after certain conditions were met. What conditions? Eleanor demanded, her mind racing. That's what's remarkable about the timing of this call, Ms. Grayson. The primary condition was that the company demonstrate a renewed commitment to, and I'm quoting directly from your father's documentation, valuing human innovation over corporate efficiency metrics. Eleanor sank back in her chair, stunned. And you believe this condition has been met now? The trust is monitored by a designated observer who has confirmed it. I'm not at liberty to reveal their identity. The lawyer paused. I can meet you at your office tomorrow afternoon to deliver the materials. That's not possible. We have an important visitor tomorrow. Eleanor's thoughts whirled. The following day, 4 o'clock. Very well. Until then, Miss Grayson. As the call ended, Eleanor sat motionless, trying to process this revelation. Her father had created a secret trust tied to the company's values, with James Parker named as a beneficiary. What could it mean? And who was this mysterious observer? Who had determined the conditions had been met? Down on the factory floor, James was dealing with his own unexpected situation. A delivery truck had arrived with a large wooden crate addressed to him personally. The shipping manifest listed the sender simply as H.G. Estate. "Where do you want this, Sarge?" asked Webb, gesturing to the crate now sitting in the receiving area. James studied the mysterious delivery with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Let's move it to the break room for now." With Webb's help, they maneuvered the crate, approximately 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, through the factory to the employee break room. Several workers gathered around, intrigued by the unusual. "Delivery. You order something special, Parker?" Davis asked, eyeing the crate. "No." James examined the shipping label more carefully. The date on it caught his attention. It had been processed over a year ago, but held for delivery until specific instructions were received. H.G. Estate could only mean one thing: Henry Grayson. Using a crowbar from maintenance, James carefully pried open the wooden lid. Inside, nestled in protective packaging, sat what appeared to be an old-fashioned filing cabinet. Attached to the front was an envelope with his name handwritten in a familiar script. With a strange sense of ceremony, James opened the envelope and unfolded a letter. "James, if you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I've passed on, and my daughter has finally started to understand what makes Grayson Manufacturing truly work. It's people. Inside this cabinet are detailed plans I've been collecting from you and the other veterans over the years. Innovations that were too disruptive for short-term thinking but essential for long-term survival. Eleanor is smart, brilliant even, but she's learned business in boardrooms, not on shop floors. She needs to see manufacturing through your eyes. I'm entrusting you with this knowledge because you understand something many don't. True efficiency comes from valuing human potential, not just measuring output. Help her see this truth." The second drawer contains something more personal. "My mechanics restored your old truck. The one you mentioned broke down beyond repair last year. It's been in storage, waiting for the right time. The keys and title are inside, both in your name now. Keep walking your path, James, but know when to accept help along the way." With respect and gratitude, Henry Grayson James read the letter twice, his hands trembling slightly. The break room had gone silent as workers sensed the gravity of the moment. "Everything okay, Sarge?" Webb asked quietly. "Yes," James replied, carefully refolding the letter. "Mr. Grayson left some instructions." He opened the first drawer of the cabinet to find meticulously organized files, blueprints, efficiency studies, and implementation plans, many based on ideas that had originated in the veterans' workshop. Each file included detailed notes in Henry Grayson's handwriting, analyzing the potential long-term benefits despite short-term disruptions. The second drawer contained a small wooden box and a thick envelope. Inside the box lay a set of keys attached to a Marine Corps keychain. The envelope held a vehicle title, already transferred to James's name, along with several photographs of a restored 1978 Ford F-150. His truck, the one that had finally died. After years of faithful service forcing him to begin his daily walks. "Son of a gun," James whispered, emotions threatening to overwhelm his usual composure. At that moment, Eleanor appeared in the break room doorway, her expression suggesting she'd received equally surprising news. She took in the scene, the crate, the filing cabinet, James holding the keys, and asked simply, "My father?" James nodded. "He left some things. For the company. And for me. He left things for me too, it seems. Or rather, for both of us." Eleanor approached, eyeing the filing cabinet. "May I?" James handed her the letter, watching as she read her father's words. Her expression shifted from curiosity to understanding to something deeper, a complex mix of grief and revelation. "He was preparing for this," she said finally, "setting things in motion even before he died." "Seems that way. Did you know about any of this?" James shook his head. "Not a clue. I knew your father took an interest in my ideas, in what we were doing at the workshop, but this," he gestured to the cabinet and keys, "this I never expected." The other workers had discreetly withdrawn, sensing the private nature of the exchange. Eleanor and James stood alone in the break room, connected by the surprising machinations of a man who had seen potential in both of them. "He restored your truck?" Eleanor asked, noticing the keys and photographs. "Apparently, it broke down beyond my ability to fix it about a year before your father's heart attack. That's when it started walking." Eleanor sat down heavily at one of the break tables. "All this time, I thought I knew him, thought I understood his vision for the company." She looked up at James. "But he had this whole other side, these connections I knew nothing about." "He kept certain things separate," James said gently. "Protected them from corporate politics, the veterans' workshop, these ideas." He gestured to the cabinet. "Maybe he was waiting for the right time, or the right person to carry them forward." Eleanor met his gaze directly. "I received a call from his lawyer just now. There's a trust, James, with provisions for what he called the Veterans Initiative, and letters for certain people, including you." James absorbed this information quietly, his military training helping him maintain composure despite the emotional impact. "Sounds like Henry was playing a long game. He always did," Eleanor said with a sad smile. "And now, somehow, we're both part of it." She stood, decision forming. "We should take this cabinet to my office. Review what's inside before Musk arrives tomorrow." James nodded agreement, then hesitated. "The truck. I should probably check on it." "Of course. The lawyer mentioned it's being stored at Wilson's garage on the edge of town." Eleanor checked her watch. "We have time before the end of your shift. I can drive you." "I appreciate that," James said, the simple kindness further bridging the gap between them. As they carefully repacked the filing cabinet, preparing to move it to Eleanor's office, Davis returned to the break room, trying and failing to appear. "Casual. So, not to interrupt, but there's some talk on the floor," he began awkwardly. "Word is, Elon Musk is coming tomorrow. That true?" Eleanor and James exchanged glances. There would be no containing this news. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "Mr. Musk has expressed interest in our approach to innovation. "Holy shit," Davis whispered, then immediately reddened. "Sorry, Mom, but why us?" James answered before Eleanor could. "Because what we're doing here matters. The way we solve problems, the way we value people's ideas. Someone finally noticed." "We should tell the rest of the team," Eleanor suggested, surprising both men. "They deserve to know why tomorrow is important." 20 minutes later, production had briefly paused as Eleanor addressed the assembled workers from the factory floor, rather than her usual position on the overhead catwalk. Standing beside James with the filing cabinet nearby, she spoke with newfound authenticity. "Tomorrow, Elon Musk will visit our facility. He's interested in how we approach innovation and problem-solving." She gestured to the workers around her. "That means he's interested in you, your ideas, your daily work, your commitment to excellence, despite obstacles." She paused, then continued with unexpected vulnerability. "I recently discovered that my father had been collecting your innovations for years, recognizing their value even when our official processes didn't. I'm only beginning to understand what he saw so clearly, that true success comes from respecting the expertise of the people doing the work." A murmur of surprise and appreciation rippled through the gathered employees. "So tomorrow, we don't put on a show. We show Musk the truth, both our challenges and our ingenious solutions. We show him what happens when people are valued for their minds as well as their labor." James watched Eleanor as she spoke, seeing her father's leadership quality emerging perhaps for the first time. The workers were responding with nods and straightened postures, pride replacing their usual resignation. "And while we prepare for tomorrow," Eleanor concluded, "I'm pleased to announce the first initiative of what my father called the Veterans Program, a transportation solution for employees who need it. Starting with their restoration of Mr. Parker's truck, which has apparently been sitting in Wilson's garage, fully repaired for over a year." She turned to James, handing him the keys with a smile that transformed her usually serious face. "I believe these are yours. Maybe tomorrow you'd consider giving Mr. Musk a ride along your usual route. Sometimes the best way to understand a problem is to experience it firsthand." As applause broke out across the factory floor, James closed, his fingers around the keys, a tangible symbol of Henry Grayson's legacy and Eleanor's evolution. "I think that could be arranged," he replied, returning her smile with a rare one of his own. Together they stood, illuminated by the industrial lighting of the factory floor, unaware that they were living out precisely the scenario Henry Grayson had envisioned, a moment of connection that transcended the traditional boundaries between management and workers, a foundation for the changes that would soon transform not just Grayson Manufacturing, but their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. Dawn broke cold and clear as James started his restored Ford F-150 for the first time in over a year. The engine rumbled to life with a rich, healthy sound that spoke of careful restoration. Running, his hands over the familiar steering wheel, James felt a complicated mix of emotions: gratitude for Henry Grayson's unexpected generosity, satisfaction at having his independence restored, and an odd sense of loss. Those daily walks, as grueling as they had become a defining part of his identity. "Well, old girl," he murmured to the truck, "looks like we've both been given a second chance." His phone chimed with a text from Eleanor. "Tesla jet landed 20 minutes ago. Musk expected at factory by 9 Any chance you could pick him up at the airstrip instead of meeting at the office? His team just requested a more authentic experience." James stared at the message, the implications sinking in. He would be alone, with one of the world's most unpredictable billionaires, responsible for making the crucial first impression. "I can do that." Heading there now. The small regional airstrip was rarely used for private jets, and the sleek Gulfstream with the Tesla logo stood out like an exotic bird among pigeons. As James pulled into the small parking area, he spotted a knot of people near the terminal building. One figure stood apart from the others, tall, with a distinctive profile instantly recognizable from countless news stories and memes. James parked and approached with measured steps, neither rushing nor hesitating. Elon Musk turned as he neared, his expression curious. "Mr. Musk, I'm James Parker from Grayson Manufacturing." Musk extended his hand. "The walking veteran, right? 10 miles each way?" His handshake was firm, his gaze direct and evaluating. "That's right, though as of yesterday, I've got wheels again." James gestured toward his truck. Musk's eyes lit up at the sight of the vintage Ford. A '78 F-150, great trucks, simple engineering, built to last. He turned to his assistants. "Change of plans. I'm going with Mr. Parker here. Meet us at the factory in 2 hours." The assistants exchanged concerned glances, but knew better than to argue. One of them handed Musk a tablet. "Your schedule?" "For the day, sir. The first video call is at 11. "Cancel anything before noon," Musk replied casually, already walking toward James's truck. "This is more interesting." As they pulled away from the airstrip, an awkward silence settled between them. A former Marine who'd walked 20 miles a day to keep his job, and a billionaire who could buy the entire town on a whim. "So," Musk said finally, "that story in the paper, how much of it was real?" The directness of the question took James by surprise. "All of it, as far as I know. The reporter's an old friend of Henry Grayson, the former owner. He doesn't embellish. And the part about you defending the CEO who tried to fire you, that true too." James kept his eyes on the road. "Ms. Grayson made a decision based on the information she had. The information was wrong. Once she understood that, she corrected course." Musk sounded unconvinced. "Most people would have taken the opportunity for revenge. Corporate executives aren't exactly beloved figures. Revenge is a luxury I can't afford," James replied simply. "Building things that work is more important than being right." This earned him a sharp glance from Musk. "That's not the typical attitude." "I'm not a typical employee, clearly." Musk studied the passing landscape, the small town giving way to rural countryside. "So instead of going straight to the factory, show me your walk, the actual route you took every day." James hesitated briefly, then nodded, turning the truck. "Down County Road 16. We'll start at my house, 10 miles to the factory from there." 20 minutes later, they stood in front of James's modest ranch home, looking down the long stretch of rural highway that led toward town. Musk, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans that probably cost more than James's monthly mortgage payment, surveyed the scene with unexpected intensity. "Walk me through it. Literally. I want to experience a quarter mile of what you did every day." James was beginning to understand why people found Musk simultaneously fascinating and exhausting. The man's focus was laser-sharp but unpredictable, jumping from topic to topic based on whatever captured his interest. They set off down the shoulder of the road, walking in silence for several minutes before Musk spoke again. "Why didn't you just move closer to the factory? Housing costs near town are triple what they are out here, and this place was my wife's dream home. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to sell it." Musk absorbed this information without the usual awkward condolences. "Cancer?" he asked simply. "Yes, 5 years ago. My first son died of SIDS," Musk offered unexpectedly. "Nothing prepares you for that kind of loss." The shared vulnerability created a strange bond between them. Two men from vastly different worlds finding common ground in personal tragedy. "So, when your truck broke down, walking was the only option," Musk continued, his breathing slightly labored as they climbed a gentle incline. "There's no public transit out here. Ride-sharing would have cost more than I make in a day. So yeah, walking was the solution. For a year. 20 miles daily. Through winter." James shrugged. "Minnesota winters build character." Musk laughed suddenly, a genuine sound of surprise and appreciation. "That's either the most stubborn or most disciplined thing I've ever heard." In the Marines, there's not much difference between the two. They reached the quarter-mile mark and Musk stopped, looking back toward the house, now small in the distance. And you do this whole route in darkness during winter? Most of it, yeah. Headlamp and reflective gear. Had a few close calls with trucks not seeing me in blizzards. Musk shook his head slowly. People talk about hustle and grit like they're just motivational poster words. This is the real thing. He checked his watch. Let's head to the factory. I've seen enough of the problem. Now show me the solution. Back in the truck, Musk's attention shifted to the restored vehicle itself. Who fixed this up? Quality work. Apparently Henry Grayson, Eleanor's father, had it restored before he died. Left it for me in some kind of trust that only activated recently. Found out yesterday. Musk's eyebrows rose. That's a plot twist. Why would he do that? Still figuring that out. He left a lot of things in motion that are just now coming to light, including hiring his daughter to run the company. James chose his words carefully. Eleanor wasn't handed the company. She worked her way up through operations at other facilities. But understanding the factory floor, that's been a learning curve for her. And now Elon Musk shows up, Musk said with a self-deprecating smirk, probably not making her day easier. Actually, she's the one who suggested I bring you along. My walking route. Said you needed to understand the whole story, not just the corporate showcase version. Did she now? Musk sounded genuinely surprised. That's refreshingly honest. At the factory, Eleanor waited at the main entrance, flanked by Diane and a visibly nervous executive team hastily assembled from available managers. Her composure slipped momentarily when James's truck pulled up instead of the expected Tesla town car, and Elon Musk emerged from the passenger side, looking remarkably relaxed. "Miss Grayson," Musk greeted her with a handshake. "Your driver here gave me quite the education on rural transportation challenges. Mr. Parker has a unique perspective on many of our operations," Eleanor replied smoothly. "We've learned to value it highly. So I gathered from your newspaper feature, though it seems there's more to the story than what was printed." Musk glanced back at James, who was parking his truck. "Something about a trust and a mysterious benefactor?" Eleanor blinked in surprise. "James told you about that?" "Just the highlights, enough to make me even more curious about what's happening here." Musk's attention was already wandering, his gaze sweeping across the factory exterior. "This building's from the 70s, isn't it? Energy efficiency must be terrible." Before Eleanor could respond, the factory doors opened and James rejoined them. "Shall we go inside?" he suggested. "There's something we'd like to show you." "Lead the way," Musk replied, ignoring the hovering executives who looked increasingly bewildered by the unorthodox nature of the visit. Inside, instead of directing Musk to the executive conference room where a presentation had been prepared, Eleanor made a split-second decision. "James, why don't you show Mr. Musk the cabinet your father left, and the floor model?" The executives exchanged alarmed glances. This was not the carefully choreographed tour they had planned, but Musk was already following James toward the break room where the filing cabinet still sat. "Miss Grayson," the CFO whispered urgently. "The presentation won't be necessary, Carl," Eleanor replied firmly. "Mr. Musk didn't come for PowerPoint slides. He came to see how we actually solve problems." In the break room, James opened the cabinet, explaining Henry Grayson's collection of innovations and improvements developed by veterans and factory workers, but never implemented through official channels. Musk pored over the documents with evident fascination. "This is brilliant stuff, simple, elegant solutions to complex problems. Why weren't these implemented?" "Corporate inertia," Eleanor answered from the doorway, having dismissed the anxious executives. "Quarterly profit targets, risk aversion, all the usual suspects." "And now?" Musk asked, looking up from a particular design that had captured his attention. "Now we're implementing them, starting with a complete factory floor redesign." Eleanor nodded to James, who retrieved the scale model they'd brought from the veterans' workshop. For the next hour, Musk immersed himself in the model and plans, asking detailed questions that revealed his deep technical knowledge. James and Eleanor explained the proposed changes, the expected efficiencies, and the short-term disruptions they would cause. This could increase your production capacity by 30%, maybe more, Musk concluded, straightening from his hunched position. Over the model. But it'll tank your next quarterly report while you implement it. Yes, Eleanor acknowledged, which is why it never happened under the previous management structure, including my own, until recently. What changed? Musk asked, his gaze intensifying. Eleanor and James exchanged a look charged with new understanding. I did, Eleanor said simply, with some help. From a guy who walks 20 miles a day and doesn't complain, Musk stated. There's a lesson. And there, the door to the break room opened abruptly as Carl, the CFO, entered with barely concealed agitation. Ms. Grayson excused the interruption, but there's been a development with the Westridge contract. The CEO is demanding immediate concessions on our price point or he's walking. Eleanor's expression darkened. Westridge again. They pull this every quarter. They're our largest customer, Carl reminded her unnecessarily. We can't afford to lose them, especially if we're implementing these, he gestured vaguely toward the model, disruptions. The tension in the room shifted palpably. This was no longer a theoretical discussion about innovation, but a real-time business crisis with immediate consequences. The great wheel of corporate theatre turns again, Musk observed dryly. Let me guess, Westridge threatens to leave, you cave on price, they stay, and your margins shrink. Rinse and repeat until you're barely profitable. Carl bristled. With all due respect, Mr. Musk, Westridge accounts for 40% of our annual revenue. We can't simply— Yes, you can, Musk interrupted. The moment you let one customer dictate your entire business model, you've already lost. Trust me, I've played this game before. Eleanor watched this exchange with growing concern. Westridge was indeed their largest client, a manufacturing conglomerate that had been squeezing Grayson's margins for years. Losing them would be catastrophic in the short term, especially if combined with the disruption of implementing the floor redesign. What would you suggest? She asked Musk directly. Call their bluff, he replied without hesitation. They're using the same tactic they always use because it always works. Change the game. James, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. There's something in the cabinet about Westridge. He pulled out a folder labeled Market Diversification, Confidential, and handed it to Eleanor. Inside were detailed analyses of alternative customers, emerging markets, and a strategy for gradually reducing dependency on Westridge, all in Henry Grayson's handwriting, dated just weeks before his death. He knew this was coming, Eleanor murmured, scanning the documents. He was preparing for it. Smart man, Musk commented, reading over her shoulder. He understood that true innovation requires freedom from coercion. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Grayson, Westridge CEO, is holding on line 1. Says it's urgent. Eleanor took a deep breath, looking first at the documents her father had prepared, then at James, whose steady presence had become a surprising anchor in recent days, and finally at Elon Musk, whose unexpected arrival had catalyzed a moment of truth. Tell him I'll call back this afternoon, she instructed, her voice firm. We're in the middle of an important meeting. Carl's face paled. Eleanor, you can't. I can, and I am. She cut him off. We're done letting Westridge dictate our future. My father saw this coming and prepared for it. Now it's time to execute his strategy. The boldness of her decision seemed to please Musk, who smiled for the first time since arriving at the factory. Now, that's leadership. Choosing long-term vision over short-term comfort. As Carl retreated, visibly shaken by this departure from protocol, Eleanor turned to James. How quickly can we implement the floor redesign? With the right team and resources, 2 weeks for the core changes, another 2 for optimization. And how much could we increase production for non-Westridge customers during that time? James considered. With focused effort, we could fulfill about 60% of our normal output while making the changes. Eleanor nodded decisively. Then that's what we'll do. We'll inform Westridge that we're undergoing scheduled maintenance and modernization for the next month, during which time their orders may experience delays. If they choose to go elsewhere, we'll accelerate our outreach to the alternative customers, identified in my father's plans. Bold move, Musk commented. Wall Street won't like it. Wall Street doesn't walk 10 miles to work in a blizzard, Eleanor replied with newfound conviction. They don't innovate on shop floors or restore trucks for loyal employees. My father understood what matters, and I'm finally beginning to see it too. The moment was interrupted by a commotion outside the break room. Through the glass panel in the door, they could see a group of workers gathering, their expressions concerned. Webb pushed through the door, looking apologetic but determined. Sorry to interrupt, ma'am, Mr. Musk, but there's something you should know. Word about the Westridge situation has spread. The floor supervisors are here. He opened the door wider, revealing Davis, Ortiz, and the other departmental leaders. We heard you're standing up to Westridge, Davis said, stepping forward. About time, if you ask me, but we know what that could mean for the company. Eleanor straightened, preparing for resistance. It's a calculated risk, but one we need to take for long-term sustainability. We agree, Ortiz surprised her by saying, and we want to help. The redesign plan, we've all studied it. If we work rotating shifts around the clock, we can implement it in 10 days instead of 2 weeks, maybe less. That would mean overtime we can't necessarily afford right now, Eleanor pointed out. Then we'll do it on regular hours, Davis countered. Call it our investment in the company's future. James watched with quiet pride as his team stepped up, demonstrating exactly the kind of initiative and commitment he'd always known they possessed. Next to him, Musk was observing the exchange with undisguised interest, his focus darting between Eleanor and the workers. "You do that?" Eleanor asked, genuine emotion breaking through her professional demeanor. "Take on that level of effort without additional compensation. We would for a company that values us enough to give James back his truck," Webb said simply. "That showed us something important. And so did standing up to Westridge," Ortiz added. "They've been squeezing us for years, everyone knows it." Eleanor looked from the workers to James, something unspoken passing between them, a recognition that the changes they'd begun were already spreading in ways neither had anticipated. "Well," Musk broke the silence, "this is getting genuinely interesting." He checked his watch. "My team should be arriving soon with 1,000 questions about battery supply chains and manufacturing protocols." He turned to Eleanor. "But I'm more interested in continuing this conversation. You've got something rare happening here, a genuine cultural transformation. That's much harder than technical innovation." The factory intercom crackled to life. "Ms. Grayson, the Tesla representatives have arrived at the main entrance." Eleanor made a split-second decision. "Tell them Mr. Musk will join them shortly." She turned to the assembled group. "Let's move this conversation to the factory floor. I want to show Mr. Musk exactly how we're going to implement these changes, with the insights of the people who will actually make it happen." As they filed out of the break room, Musk fell into step beside James. "Your CEO has more spine than I expected," he commented quietly. "She's finding her way," James replied, "just like her father hoped she would." "And you? What's your stake in all this?" James considered the question carefully. 20 years in the Marines taught me that systems only work when people believe in them. I believe in what we're building here." Musk nodded slowly. "That might be the most honest answer I've heard in months." He glanced ahead at Eleanor, who was engaged in animated conversation with the floor supervisors. "You know, I didn't come here looking for battery suppliers or manufacturing partners. That's what my team thinks this visit is about." What did you come for then? James asked. Inspiration, Musk admitted with surprising candor. Fresh perspective. Silicon Valley gets insular. Sometimes the most important innovations happen in places like this, where necessity forces creativity. They reached the factory floor, where the day shift workers paused in their tasks, eyes widening at the unusual procession led by their CEO and featuring one of the world's most famous entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor addressed them. With newfound authority, I'd like to share some significant decisions we've made today. Decisions that will affect all of us, but that I believe will secure Grayson Manufacturing's future for generations to come. As she outlined the Westridge situation and the accelerated implementation plan, James watched the faces of his colleagues, seeing not fear or resistance, but cautious hope. Next to him, Elon Musk observed it all with calculating intensity, his expression suggesting that he was witnessing something more valuable than any manufacturing contractor-supply agreement. Change was coming to Grayson Manufacturing. Faster and more profound than anyone had anticipated when James Parker had walked into Eleanor Grayson's office just days earlier, expecting to lose his job, not help transform a company. Dawn broke over Grayson Manufacturing to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. What had been a methodically organized production floor just 72 hours earlier now resembled a massive puzzle in mid-assembly as workers implemented the new layout with remarkable speed and dedication. James moved through the transformation with calm authority, clipboard in hand. "Parker!" Davis called from near the assembly line. "We've hit a snag with the conveyor reconfiguration." James surveyed the problem, immediately seeing the issue. "We need to adjust by about 3 degrees. Get WebTor calculate the connections to stations 4 through 6. "Already called him," Davis confirmed with a grin. "Just wanted your sign-off. We're learning, Sarge." In her office above the production floor, Eleanor surveyed the activity below, a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration coursing through her. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Implementation looks impressive from the satellite view. Your team works fast." And before she could respond, Diane knocked at her door. "Ms. Grayson, the lawyer is here. Mr. Whitfield, regarding your father's trust." Martin Whitfield arranged several documents on her desk with practiced precision. "As I mentioned during our call, Ms. Grayson, your father established this trust approximately 5 years ago with specific activation conditions that have recently been met." He adjusted his glasses. "The trust contains 3 main components: financial provisions for what are termed the Veterans Initiative, letters to designated individuals, and a sealed envelope to be opened only when all conditions are satisfied." When James joined them, Whitfield handed him an envelope. "This is for you from Henry Grayson. And this," he continued, placing a larger sealed envelope on the desk, "is addressed to both of you, with instructions that it be opened only when you're together. The financial aspect of the trust is substantial," Whitfield explained. $5 million, designated specifically for implementing innovations developed by veterans employed at Grayson Manufacturing, with you as trustee and Mr. Parker as program director. After reading their individual letters, they opened the sealed envelope addressed to them both, discovering detailed notes and diagrams for the Grayson method, a comprehensive manufacturing philosophy integrating veteran-led innovation teams into traditional corporate structures. My father systematized everything we were doing informally at the workshop, Eleanor realized, created a scalable model for any manufacturing business. Down on the factory floor, workers gathered around the newly arranged production line. Davis stood at the control panel, waiting for the signal to activate the system. Colonel Harris and other veterans from the workshop had arrived to witness the moment. With ceremonial flourish, Davis initiated the startup sequence. The first test piece entered the system and moved through the redesigned workflow with graceful efficiency. When The completed piece emerged at the end of the line. The entire factory erupted in spontaneous applause. The timestamp showed a 27% reduction in production time, even better than their projections. Eleanor's phone rang. Elon Musk himself. "Congratulations on the successful implementation. Your team has exceeded expectations, which rarely happens. In my experience." His voice carried distinctive intensity. "I'm calling because what you're doing there goes beyond one factory. It's a potential model for reimagining American manufacturing. I'm proposing a partnership," Musk continued. "Initial investment of $50 million, with potential for 10 times that if the pilot succeeds. Your father's $5 million is a good start, but to scale nationally, you'll need considerably more." The mention of her father's trust stopped Eleanor. A cold, "How do you know about that?" "Let's just say I've been following Grayson Manufacturing longer than you realize. Henry and I corresponded occasionally about manufacturing philosophy. His ideas were ahead of their time." As Eleanor and James processed this revelation, the successful test run had energized the factory workers, who were already making minor adjustments to the new system. Maya approached, her technical mind racing with possibilities. "If we apply this same methodology to the finishing department, we could see similar gains there." The implications settled over them. What had begun as a story about a veteran walking 10 miles to work was evolving into something that might reshape American industry. 6 months later, James pulled his truck into the expanded parking lot of what was now called Grayson Tesla Innovation Center. The physical changes were obvious. A new wing dedicated to research and development, solar panels covering the previously barren roof, and the once faded sign replaced with a sleek new display. Inside, the quarterly all-hands meeting was about to begin. 6 months ago, such gatherings had been perfunctory affairs. Today, they were standing room only, with teams eagerly sharing achievements. "Good morning, everyone," Eleanor called the meeting to order. "As of yesterday, Grayson Manufacturing has officially hired our 100th veteran through the Expanded Employment Initiative. More importantly, our retention rate stands at 97% across all departments, compared to the industry average of 68%. James stepped forward to reveal their latest innovation. "This is the Grayson Tesla Mobile Manufacturing Unit, a self-contained, solar-powered production system that can be deployed anywhere in the world within 72 hours. The implications for disaster relief, remote construction, and developing economies are enormous," Eleanor added. "Tesla is providing the power systems and logistics support, while Grayson is contributing the manufacturing expertise and training protocols." Later that day, Colonel Harris entered Eleanor's office, accompanied by a middle-aged woman. "This is Dr. Angela Morrison, formerly of the Department of Labor, now heading the National Manufacturing Initiative. It's an honor to meet you both," Dr. Morrison said. "Your work has been causing quite a stir in Washington." Dr. Morrison was an early advocate for veteran integration in specialized manufacturing, the colonel explained. "She's been following the Grayson experiment with considerable interest." "Not just following," Dr. Morrison corrected with a smile. "In fact, I've had a rather unique perspective on your progress as the observer Henry Grayson appointed for his trust." James and Eleanor exchanged stunned glances as another piece of Henry's puzzle fell into place. "There's more," Colonel Harris added. "Dr. Morrison isn't just here about the past. She's here about the future, specifically the expansion of the Grayson method to other manufacturing sectors. The National Manufacturing Initiative has secured bipartisan support for a major investment in what we're calling veteran-led industrial renewal," Dr. Morrison explained. $2 billion over 5 years, with matching funds from private sector partners. As they discussed this extraordinary development, Webb entered with breaking news. Westridge just announced bankruptcy protection. They're citing inability to compete in the evolving manufacturing landscape. Eleanor straightened, decision forming. We should acquire them, not for their assets, but for their people. 3,000 skilled manufacturing workers who deserve better leadership. We could transform their facilities using the Grayson method and preserve those jobs. James considered the proposal, seeing both its audacity and its alignment with their evolving mission. It would be the ultimate test case for whether our approach can revive a failing company, not just enhance a stable one. Later, at Lou's diner, Eleanor and James reflected on how far they'd come. 6 months ago, I nearly fired one of our most valuable employees because I couldn't see beyond spreadsheets, Eleanor admitted. And I was walking 20 miles a day rather than asking for help, James acknowledged. We both had lessons to learn. Do you ever miss it? Eleanor asked suddenly. The solitude of those walks, James considered thoughtfully. Sometimes. There was a clarity in that struggle, but there's a different kind of satisfaction in what we're building now, something more meaningful than personal endurance. From individual persistence to collective purpose, Eleanor nodded. Exactly. 2 years after their partnership began, James Parker stood before the capacity crowd at the National Manufacturing Conference. His Ford F-150 sat on display at the side of the stage, a tangible symbol of the journey that had brought him here. Manufacturing isn't just about machines and processes, James began. It's about people solving problems together. 2 years ago, I walked because I had to. Today, thousands of veterans have a different path, one that values their problem-solving, abilities and perspective. From the front row, Eleanor watched with quiet pride. Their partnership had transformed not just Grayson Manufacturing, but the very concept of American industrial production. When we acquired Westridge Manufacturing 18 months ago, many called it reckless, James acknowledged. But what looked like acquisition was actually resurrection. By implementing the Grayson method, we didn't just save 3,000 jobs. We created 2,000 more. Productivity increased by 43% in the first year. As James concluded, Eleanor took the stage. Today marks another milestone. This morning, we finalized agreements with the federal government to establish veteran manufacturing centers in 50 communities nationwide, with funding secured for the next decade. But numbers and expansion plans don't tell the real story, she continued. The real story is about people like Maya Reyes, whose innovations have transformed emergency housing in disaster zones, or Davis Williams, whose expertise has helped 14 struggling factories find new life. Today, we're announcing the final phase of what my father envisioned. The Grayson Foundation, with initial funding of $1 billion, will establish manufacturing education centers in community colleges nationwide, focusing on veterans and underserved populations. In the back of the hall, though few recognized him in his baseball cap and casual attire, Elon Musk observed with characteristic intensity. His impulsive interest in a small-town manufacturing story had catalyzed one of his most successful ventures outside the tech and automotive worlds. After the presentation, a special ceremony awaited at the original Grayson facility, now transformed into the flagship Grayson Method Training Center. Hundreds gathered, workers from the original factory, veterans who had graduated from training programs, community members whose lives had been touched by the Grayson Renaissance. Colonel Harris stepped forward. 2 years ago, James Parker walked 10 miles to work because he had no better option. Today, because of his perseverance and the partnership he formed with Eleanor Grayson, thousands have opportunities they never imagined possible. At his signal, a covering was removed to reveal a life-sized bronze sculpture. James, in his work, clothes, striding purposefully forward, beside Eleanor in business attire, both looking toward the horizon. The plaque beneath read, "The journey begins with a single step. Grayson Tesla Industries, founded 2023. Whitfield stepped forward with a sealed envelope. This was the final element of Henry Grayson's trust, to be delivered only when the vision has been fully realized and my daughter and James Parker have transformed not just Grayson Manufacturing, but American manufacturing itself. Inside was a brief handwritten message: Eleanor and James, if you're reading this, you've accomplished more than I dared hope. What began as my small attempt to preserve manufacturing wisdom has blossomed into something transformative under your stewardship. The greatest innovations often come from unexpected connections between different perspectives, different experiences, different worlds. You too embody that truth. Remember, as you move forward, manufacturing isn't just about making things. It's about making possibilities for workers, for communities, for a nation that has sometimes forgotten the dignity of creating something real, with pride beyond words. Henry P.S. James. Keep the truck. But remember, you're not walking alone anymore. Later, James and Eleanor stood outside by his restored F-150. Sometimes it's still overwhelming, James admitted. All of this from a newspaper article about a guy walking to work. That's not really where it started, though, is it? Eleanor leaned against the truck beside him. It started with my father seeing something in both of us that we couldn't see ourselves, with veterans sharing ideas that weren't valued in traditional channels, with your decision to respond to rejection with analysis rather than anger, and your willingness to admit when you were wrong, James added. Not every employee would have given their boss a second chance, Eleanor countered with a smile. As they turned toward the building, James paused, looking back at the long road he had walked countless times. Sometimes I think about the version of me still walking that road in some parallel universe where you did fire me, where Musk never read that article, where your father never left those letters. And, Eleanor prompted, I'm grateful for this reality, not just for myself, but for all the people whose lives have changed because one CEO was willing to listen and one veteran was stubborn enough to keep walking until something better came along. Inside, hundreds of lives transformed by their unlikely partnership awaited, the first wave of what would become thousands across a revitalized American manufacturing landscape. And, in his carefully restored truck, James had mounted a small plaque with words from Henry Grayson's letter that had become his personal mantra. Manufacturing isn't just about making things, it's about making possibilities.